Now, we've talked about micronutrition. We've talked about nutrient timing all the way from entire weeks to days to meals to around your workout. Now we're going to talk about the least important part of any nutrition plan, and actually an unnecessary part called supplementation. So the word supplementation means that it supplements something else. So that means, therefore, it is not necessary. The impact of any supplement, even the most effective supplement out there on the market, is minuscule in comparison to effective training or an effective diet. That is something you need to understand from the get-go as you give mentorship to your athletes. Okay? Now, unfortunately, the bodybuilding community is very much intrinsically tied in with the supplement industry. And there is a huge amount of misconception in the bodybuilding community about the importance of supplements and which ones are actually effective. It is your role to help educate your athletes about the actual importance of supplements and to give them evidence-based information on supplementation. Now, it's extremely important to reiterate your scope of practice. You cannot make supplement recommendations. That is clearly within the purview of registered dietitian. What you can do, since your clients are going to be undoubtedly taking supplements, probably ones they don't need to take, probably so much that actually by hiring you they might save money despite paying you to coach them, if you just to simply eliminate all the irrelevant supplements on their list, or recommend which ones, not recommend, or educate them on which ones don't benefit them. That is your role, education rather than recommendation. So what should you be educating your client on in regards to supplementation? First off is quality. A proprietary blend is something that means that they don't have to tell you what is in it. It is a name that contains a various number of ingredients, and they don't have to tell you the actual quantities of the individual ingredients. That means they can call some proprietary blend some catchy phrase like the muscle blend, and then simply provide a lower than effective dose of many supplements and make it look like they've done everything to make the supplement awesome. Any product that has a proprietary blend, I would not recommend taking. Now, this is also done to protect the formula that various supplement companies use for a product, but the downsides of that outweigh the positives. And considering that most supplements don't have any effective quality, is a proprietary blend even necessary? You need to be asking yourself this question when you evaluate supplements. Another thing that I'd recommend is ensuring that the manufacturing process and the quality control that the individual companies that the client asks you about to educate them on are high. So you want to look for USP or GMP type of supplements and manufacturing processes. Ideally, every time your client gets a supplement, they should get a lab report. If a company can't provide a lab report or charges for it, I wouldn't recommend working with them. If they can't tell you that what is on the label is actually in the product, you should be concerned about that. This is extremely rare, and that means that I am recommending against the vast majority of supplement companies. And the reason why I do that is because it's become increasingly common for supplements to be contaminated by banned substances. And if you are working with athletes who are regularly drug tested, you can potentially put your reputation and your client's competitive career for life at risk by them taking a supplement that may result in a positive drug test. So you need to be very circumspect about the education you give to your clients when they ask you about supplements. So, are there supplements that do something effective? Yes. They're the small minority of all supplements overall. Creatine monohydrate is by far the most researched supplement out there for anaerobic athletes, which bodybuilders are. You've probably heard about creatine, but to give you a brief overview of what it does, creatine phosphate is the fuel we use along with ATP for immediate explosive efforts and is the largest contributor to the weight training that your athletes are going to be doing. So it can not only improve performance through a fuel source, but it also seems to have some long-term effects on skeletal muscle adaptation. Are these large? No, not at all. As I said, you need to put supplements in context, but it definitely works. Creatine monohydrate, if your clients ask about it, simply educate them on it and let them make the decision on whether or not they want to use it. Now, there are many other forms of creatine, and the most popular ones have been studied and have found to be less effective, both in terms of absorption and performance, compared to creatine monohydrate. So if it's not monohydrate, let them know that, okay? The second most well-researched performance-enhancing supplement is caffeine. Caffeine has two effects. One is to suppress tiredness, and then at a high enough dosage is to stimulate the nervous system to the point where it can potentially enhance performance. For an anaerobic athlete, this is occurring in the dosage range of 5 to 6 milligrams per kg. Now this also happens to be close to the tolerable upper level intake for caffeine. So that means you need to be careful about it. Also, regularly taking caffeine, especially at these higher dosages, promotes a tolerance. Now the good thing about a tolerance is that this only starts to negate one of these two effects, and that's the potential to enhance resistance training or anaerobic performance. You will always get the blockage of tiredness from caffeine. And during contest prep where fatigue is very common, this may be something that an athlete is interested in and asks you about. Now, if they ask you about how do I effectively and continually enhance performance by taking caffeine, then you need to suggest to them that if that is their goal, they might need to only take caffeine in a certain time interval. Perhaps once or twice per week for their hardest workouts and not at all or on other days, or they will develop a tolerance that will diminish that effect. So then it's up to the athlete to decide whether or not suppressing tiredness on a regular basis or trying to enhance performance on a semi-regular basis is more important. And that actually might change over the course of a diet. Finally, there's beta-alanine. Beta-alanine, taken in the range of 4 grams per day. Let's go back to creatine. Creatine. Pause. Creatine. So, creatine, the dosage. People have talked about loading creatine. And it is true that the first time you take creatine, or if you've gone off creatine and started again, you will get an enhanced rate of absorption by loading creatine. We're talking in the range of 15 to 25 grams per day for 3 or 4 days. Loading is not needed because simply taking a low dose in the range of 3 to 5 grams per day, depending on your body weight, will result in muscle creatine saturation within 2 to 3 weeks. In fact, that maintenance dose is all that is required to maintain levels, and going completely off creatine, you won't fall to below supplemental levels for another 2 to 3 weeks. It's just kind of like topping off your gas tank. So the education you want to provide to your client is that roughly 3 to 5 grams per day is all that's needed. If they want to load, that's up to them. From a coaching perspective, someone taking creatine monohydrate for 3 weeks before they reach muscle creatine levels of saturation may cause some issues. Because as creatine is stored, water is stored in the muscles as well, and water weighs something. So you may see a period of that 2 to 3 weeks where weight loss is hampered or completely diminished, or you might even see weight gain. This is not because they're no longer losing fat. You just can't determine what is resulting in the scale weight change. So you may tell the client, hey, this is what's going to happen. If you take creatine for 3 weeks while we're dieting, this might eliminate the weight loss. That might stress you out. If you want, you can load it, and then we'll only have 1 week of wacky weigh-ins. We'll only have 1 week of our data disruption, right? But in the long term, whether you loaded the first time you took creatine or whether you took 3 to 5 grams per day for your entire lifting career, it's going to have a negligible effect on performance long term. So it's up to you. Consider the pros and cons. All right, back to beta-alanine. Beta-alanine is essentially a buffer, a fatigue buffer. And the effective dose is around 4 grams per day, and it is not an acute supplement like caffeine. It is something that builds up in the system over time and can potentially affect performance, but only specific performance and only to a very small degree. Largely, the effect begins at around 60 to 240 second efforts. Now, the only time a bodybuilder is going to be doing a continuous high-intensity effort for that long is if they're doing reps that are 15 or higher, or if they're potentially doing interval training that approximates those intensity efforts, or if they have restricted rest periods. Now, we're going to talk about effective training later in this course, and you're going to see that, in fact, beta-alanine is therefore rarely needed. But it's good to know, and you may get asked about it, and there's plausibly a situation where a client would want to be educated about that and choose to take beta-alanine, but probably not likely. So, those are our potential performance-enhancing supplements that we talked about. Now we're going to get into some more basic supplements, if you will. All right? So earlier in this module, we were talking about micronutrients and how common mineral and micronutrient deficiencies and vitamin deficiencies are in dieting bodybuilders, and how difficult it might be to maintain micronutrient status and adequacy while dieting. So one of your clients may ask you, should I be taking a multivitamin? And what you want to do is educate them on the potential outcomes of taking a multivitamin and let them decide what to do. So first off, we've established adequate intake is difficult from just food, especially when dieting. All right? There was also a systematic review of multivitamin and mineral use over a lifetime, and it found that there was a potential small health benefit to taking multivitamins. And most importantly, there wasn't an effect of harm. Multivitamins, on the whole, didn't seem to hurt anybody. Okay? Now, my advice would be that you take a relatively low-dosed multivitamin, or you educate your clients about the differences between your quote-unquote bodybuilding or sports multivitamins or your more standard low-dose one a day, or a targeted multivitamin specific to the deficiencies that we saw earlier. Okay? Now, your standard bodybuilding mindset, unfortunately, is that more is better. And in fact, we talked about the potential risk of overdosing when taking multivitamins, especially fat-soluble ones. So you want to be giving advice that, yes, evidence has shown that perhaps a multivitamin could show a safety net and could provide a health benefit long term. However, you want to make sure that they also know that a large dose could be potentially harmful. So the safest education that you can give them so they make the beneficial choice for themselves is to take a low-dose multivitamin or targeted to the potential deficiencies they might have, rather than some kind of catch-all 6-pill packet that is completely overdosed in a variety of micronutrients. Okay? Now, one specific micronutrient that is an extremely common and increasingly common deficiency in Western society is vitamin D. So we talked about the potential downsides of being vitamin D deficient previously. Now let's contextualize how common that is. In the US, some reports suggest that nearly 80% of people are below the vitamin D status that they should be at. Okay? Now this makes sense. Vitamin D is created in the body when sunlight contacts our skin. If we spend more time indoors, more time in cars, and more time not being outside like we did ancestrally, we're going to get less sunlight contact. So therefore, we're going to have less vitamin D in our body. And therefore, we're at risk for deficiency, and therefore, we're at risk for immunosuppression, hormonal status changes that are unfavorable for our goals, and potentially decrements to performance. Okay? So, and also long-term bone health. Now, also, the reviews on vitamin D supplementation would suggest that between 1,000 to 2,000 international units per day is completely safe in 99.9999% of people. Okay? And it's likely to improve the status to get the person eventually up to where they should be. Now, ideally, if someone asks you and is concerned about their vitamin D status, you would tell them that to know whether or not they're deficient, they would need a blood test. And roughly 40 nanograms per milliliter is where they need to be at on their blood test or higher to optimize vitamin D status. So if they're interested in this, you would need to send them to their physician or an RD, get their blood test, and then they would decide, based on their physician's recommendation, whether or not they wanted to supplement with vitamin D to try to correct the deficiency or to try to optimize their vitamin D level to try to hopefully prevent all of the downsides to deficiency. Okay? This is not a comprehensive list of supplementation, and this will change over time. I may remove or add things, but this is where the evidence currently stands, and this is where you should be focusing your attention. And remember, your role is not to recommend supplements, but rather to educate your clients when those eventual questions come up. I would also recommend that you have them check out resources so they can educate themselves. There are great websites out there that are evidence-based, or even journals that are open access that you can access and find out information and look at position stands of organizations on supplementation. Okay?